Greetings, people! I am the Witch of Akaroom, and your mind is now being taken over by me.
Greetings, everybody! I'm Commander Great, CG for short. A lot of stuff has sure happened the past few months. For example, and who could forget? So after all of that, I decided that today I'm just gonna sit down, relax, and watch some nice movies.
Hey, CG.
Oh yeah, and I've also got an alien living with me now.
You know, from my point of view, you're the aliens, right?
Good one.
Oh no, she's right.
Anyways, without further ado, I'm gonna start my little movie night. First movie up, Avengers Infinity War. Wow, what a piece of art.
Did someone say art?
Yeah, that was me.
Ah, of course. Art. One of the great pillars of our society. Art. Who doesn't love art? Art can come in all different shapes and sizes, from a beautiful hand-painted sculpture to a banana taped to a wall. Anything you can possibly think of can be art.
Joe, what are you doing?
I'm talking about art. You know, like how you always talk about stuff you like?
Yeah, but you can't just hijack my video. This is Commander Great, CG for short, not Commander Plant. You know what, I'm just gonna end it there.
Aw, come on, man. It's art. It's important to talk about.
Oh, like movie posters?
What? No, I'm not talking about that nerdy stuff you're into. I'm talking about actual art, like the great works of great authors like William Shakespeare and George Orwell.
Oh, and the Marvel movies!
What?
Yeah, look! It's Spider-Man!
CG, no matter how fun you think those movies are, they are not art.
You know what, Joe? I think your comments about the Marvel movies are really disrespectful. They were all worked on by teams of highly talented people. You can't take that away from me!
Jeez, calm down, dude. It's not that serious.
You know what, Joe? I'm gonna prove to you that the Marvel movies are in fact art. And by the end, you're gonna agree with me.
Sure, go ahead. Try to make me change my mind.
Okay then, here is every single Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, show, and special ranked from worst to best.
Oh god. What did I just unleash?
Hulk smash?
No, Hulk. Real men don't smash little girls.
So, what is in my opinion the worst MCU movie? I could say it's Thor the Dark World, or Eternals, or Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, but I'm gonna go with the Incredible Hulk. I said Incredible Hulk. Thank you. This movie has always felt like kind of the black sheep of the MCU, or should I say, green sheep? Okay, I'll stop. It was the only movie made under Universal, and it also has a different actor for the Hulk compared to in the future movies because, I don't know, Edward Norton died on set or something. It was a while since I looked into it. Not to mention the CGI. Oh my god, the CGI. This is undoubtedly the worst any of these movies I've ever looked. People think the CGI in Phase 4 is bad. I mean, it is, but they don't realize how lucky we are to not be stuck with whatever this is. Bro, be looking like a Burger King commercial. Everything just feels so weightless. When I look at the Hulk, I don't feel like I'm looking at a giant green monster. I just feel like I'm looking at a video game character. The movie also just feels kinda off. The delivery of the actors can be really weird sometimes, and it's also like really dark. Like, turn up the brightness, I can't see shit. And also, did I mention that it's really boring? It feels like nothing happens in this movie. Yeah, obviously stuff happens, but you don't feel invested in any of it. And yes, it would probably be better if I just rewatched the movie so I could have it fresh in my mind, but I'm not rewatching The Incredible Hulk for a stupid YouTube video that's gonna get like 600 views top. Go back to Jeremy Johns, you Incredible Hulk defenders. This is Commander Grade, and here we do things my way. Yeehaw. So, while I don't think this is a terrible movie on its own, it's definitely the worst and most forgettable MCU movie in my opinion. Still better than the 2003 Hulk movie though, I'll tell you that.
Boring!
Thor the Dark World. Oh boy, Thor the Dark World. This is the movie people always think about when the worst MCU movies are brought up. But does it really deserve that title? Yeah, of course it does. It's near the bottom for a reason. This movie is just so mediocre. I'm someone who didn't even like the first Thor movie that much, but when I compare it to this one, oh, it's 100 times better. I'd rather watch Thor getting run over any day rather than Loki's stupid fake-out death. Everything about this movie is just so mediocre. The only redeeming parts of this movie are Loki and Thor's relationship. Watching these two characters interact and banter with each other is actually pretty fun. Except for, you know, when halfway through the movie we get that stupid Loki fake-out death scene in the Dark World, and then for the rest of the movie we're stuck following Thor and Jane. Then of course we've got the Dark World. What the heck even is the Dark World? It's literally the title of the movie, and yet we don't even spend that much time in it. I don't even remember what they were doing there in the first place, or even what the name of the main villain is. Yeah, it's probably explained in the actual movie, but again, I'm not gonna rewatch Thor the Dark World for this stupid video, I'm not. Seeing it once is enough. Seeing it again might be too much for my fragile soy boy soul. Screw this movie, let's continue.
Hey, what's
Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Yes, it really is that bad. This is one of the more recent Marvel movies on the list, only coming out back in February of this year, and this one was really a major disappointment. And the thing was, I was really looking forward to this movie. I'm actually quite a big fan of the Ant-Man movies. This one, however, barely even felt like an Ant-Man movie. The other two movies in the trilogy were always just fun, light-hearted heist movies that just so happened to evolve cool powers. This one, on the other hand, just felt like a bargain bin Avengers movie. It's pretty much as generic of an MCU movie as you can get. We got the iconic Marvel humor that feels forced just so the audience can get a quick laugh. We got the generic action scenes, the weird editing, and of course the CGI. Oh god, the CGI. It doesn't even feel like a movie made by a real person, you know? It just feels like an AI was fed all the previous Marvel movies into its database and was asked to write the next one, and this is what it came up with. That being said, it's not a completely terrible movie. It's still got a few fun scenes, like the one where Ant-Man is doing the heist for Kang and you see all these different variations of him climbing on top of each other. It's a really cool and creative scene. We've also got Kang in this movie, who from what we see of him is a pretty interesting villain, you know, until he gets killed by a bunch of ants. And oh yeah, we've also got Modoc! Modoc is a disgrace to cinema and I'm glad he died. What the hell were they even thinking with this design? It just looks so off. The CGI with his mouth when he talks is just so weird and unnatural, I hate it. I've seen a lot of people say that his design borders on the uncanny valley, and yeah, that's pretty much the only way I can describe it. Okay, I've had enough of him, get him out of my face.
too many cooks, too many cooks?
Eternals is very, very, very boring. God, what a mess of a film. This is one of the few movies I hadn't actually watched before making this list. Now that I've seen it, yeah, I kind of agree with what other people think about it. It's pretty bad. Where do I even start with this movie? Everything in it just feels so bland and uninteresting. But like, it really shouldn't be. There are elements here for a great movie. It really has some interesting ideas, such as its themes of family, humanity, and knowing right from wrong. I just wish the execution of these ideas was better. The main problem with this movie is that there's just too many characters. The main cast are all made up of 10 people, and throughout the movie you don't really feel like you get to know any of them. Sure, I can name their powers, like the one who runs fast, the one who invents things, and the one who can turn things into stone, but I could not for the life of me name any of their personality traits. And no, liking iPhones is not a personality trait. And I still have no idea how they're gonna connect this movie with a larger MCU. Like what, are they gonna put the Eternals in the next Avengers movie? Are they gonna team up with Thor? If so, I'd be surprised if they did so in an Eternal sequel, because by looking at how the first one did at the box office, yeah, I don't know if they're even gonna make a sequel at this point. I see either two possibilities with the Eternals. Either A, they try to somehow continue their story through other movies and shows, or B, they just pretend it never happened and sweep everything about the Eternals under the rug. Honestly, plan B doesn't seem too bad. Let's do that. When I look at this movie, I just see a lot of missed opportunities. I really do think that if the script was given a couple more drafts, it really could have ended up being a great movie. But as it stands, yeah, I have no desire to watch it again.
Why are you so excited?
We're gonna go watch Thor.
We about to watch. Bro, sorry, you're jumping on the popcorn.
Thor 1 is fine. Yeah, this is one of those movies that when I first watched it, I thought, okay, that was a pretty good movie. But looking back on it, yeah, it was kind of mediocre. Going back to watch these old Thor movies after seeing Ragnarok and especially Love and Thunder just feels like night and day. He doesn't even feel like the same character here, and for as annoying as he can be in Love and Thunder, I'd much rather take that Thor over this one. It's weird though, because there are elements of this movie that I actually really like. Number one being Loki. He is just such an amazing villain, and I can see why they decided to keep him around for a long time in the MCU. Asgard as a whole as well is just absolutely beautiful, and you kinda just end up wishing the entire movie took place there instead of boring old New Mexico. Yeah, that's the main problem with these first two Thor movies. The human stuff is just so incredibly, unbelievably boring. Like, you have this whole world set up with a deep history and powerful gods, only to have like 70% of the movie take place on Earth. And out of all the states you could have chosen, you chose New Mexico? You could have chosen any other state, New Jersey, Michigan, California, but you chose New Mexico? Name me one cool thing about New Mexico. No, Breaking Bad doesn't count. Watching these humans is just so boring. Like, dude, I don't care about these scientists and Thor's Natalie Portman girlfriend. I want to see Thor go on adventures with Loki and kick some ass. But instead we get this boring fish out of water story about Thor being stuck on Earth without his powers, which is just so boring. At least we got this scene out of it. She-Hulk definitely is a show. This is one of the first Marvel shows I'm going to be talking about, and this one is undoubtedly the worst one. And no, not because I'm one of those people, but because the show is just kind of mid. I still remember back when the show was first coming out, and people were absolutely hating on it. Now, some people definitely had some valid criticisms, such as the god-awful CGI in some scenes, the cringeworthy humor, and that really weird fourth wall-breaking ending. And then some people were just hating on it because, duh, woman bad. Now, where do I stand on the show? Overall, the show does have some fun elements that I did enjoy. Like, I actually did really enjoy the relationship between Jen and Bruce, and the way the show kind of balances fun superhero stuff with Jen being a lawyer. That stuff I found pretty interesting. But when I look back on the show as a whole, I didn't really have that great of a time with it. I found the writing to be pretty annoying at parts, and the CGI is just... well, it's not even that it's horrible, it's just slightly off, driving a little too close to the uncanny valley. So while it has some good elements, overall, I can't say I was that impressed by it. Screw geeks and gamers, though.
Can a robot write a symphony? Can a robot turn a canvas into a beautiful masterpiece?
I ain't had my wee-wee sucked properly in a few months.
Avengers Age of Ultron. It's the worst Avengers movie. Now, after the smash hit that was the first Avengers movie, people were expecting the second one to go even bigger, even darker, even grander. And was that what we got? I mean, the seeds are here for a great movie. The characters are all on point, the action is well done, and Ultron can be a pretty cool villain in some scenes. But the movie kinda got ruined for me with all the abundance of comedy.
Shit! Language!
This movie has way too much comedy, especially in scenes where it doesn't belong at all. I mean, on paper, this is a really dark story. An AI gains conscience and wants to kill all of humanity. That's a pretty big threat, but all the characters just kind of treat it like it's another job for them, which it kind of is. Not even Ultron himself is taking that seriously. Yeah, I know he's supposed to have the personality of Tony Stark who created him, but it just ends up feeling kind of cheesy. At least we got introduced to some of the mainstay MCU characters in this movie, like WandaVision and Quicksilver. Okay, never mind. Iron Man 2 is fine. This was the first sequel they ever did in the MCU, being a follow-up to the hugely successful first Iron Man movie. So, did the sequel live up to the hype? Well, kinda. It's not like it's terribly worse than the first movie. It still got Tony Stark and his snarky attitude. It still got good effects, funny moments, and fun characters like funny man Jon Favreau. But when you look at the movie as a whole, yeah, it's got way more noticeable flaws than the first one. In this one, Tony Stark is acting reckless and gets himself mixed up in a crazy plot with this Russian whiplash guy who wants to build his own Iron Man suits, except they're drones instead of suits. And there's this phony businessman, and Tony almost destroys his house and invents a new element. And, War Machine was there, I guess. Yeah, the main problem with this movie is that it's just kind of forgettable. It doesn't really have a grand effect on the MCU as a whole either. Yeah, Nick Fury and Black Widow are here, but they don't really do anything to affect the plot that much. They're mostly just here to set up the Avengers and be in some cool action scenes. So overall, the movie is just kind of forgettable, especially when you compare it to the other two Iron Man movies. Yeah, you can tell I don't really have much to say about this movie. It was pretty boring. I like the Russian guy with the bird. That's pretty much it. Captain Marvel. Now, you hear me out. Captain Marvel is not that bad, but it's not that good either. Yeah, this is another one of those movies that people absolutely freaked out over when it was coming out. Many people even going so far as to call it the worst MCU movie. And like, yeah, it's kind of mediocre, but like, come on guys, it's not that bad. The main problem I have with this movie is that the main character doesn't really have much of a personality. Like, yeah, she expresses emotions like anger and happiness, but you still don't feel like you get to know her. The main reason for this in-universe is because she's got amnesia, and throughout the movie she's got to piece together what happened to her. This part of the movie is actually pretty interesting. Some of my favorite scenes were definitely the flashback scenes, and seeing where it all leads to in the end with finding out where Carol got her powers is pretty cool. That's really the best way I can describe this movie. It's pretty cool. The fight scenes are cool, the characters are cool, the explosions are cool, but after you're done watching it, it doesn't really impact you that much. The best part of the movie though was definitely getting to see a younger Nick Fury, and his relationship with Carol throughout the movie was pretty fun. But when I look at the movie as a whole, yeah, it was overall kind of forgettable. I love Goose though. Thor Love and Thunder. It's actually pretty okay. Now, this will probably be one of my more unpopular takes, but Love and Thunder really isn't as bad as people say it is. I mean, it's not that good either, but it's got some fun moments. This movie came out at what was kind of a bad time for the MCU. Many movies hadn't really been living up to the hype, and people are getting kinda sick of the MCU. People looked at this movie as sort of the savior of the MCU. I mean, surely a new Thor movie directed by Taika Waititi can't be a disappointment, right? Right? It's kinda weird how divisive this movie turned out to be. I mean, the previous Thor movie, Thor Ragnarok, was almost universally loved, and both were directed by Taika Waititi, who's an excellent director. So, where did things go wrong? Well, the number one flaw with this movie definitely has to be, just like Age of Ultron, the overabundance of comedy, except here it's even more doubled down. This movie has major tonal issues. One scene you'll be watching a character going through a tough battle with cancer, and then the next scene will throw a bunch of screaming goats in your face. And I would excuse this if most of the jokes weren't so lame. Like in the span of 1 minute there will be 9 different jokes, and maybe only 2 of them will actually land. This was probably done since the previous Thor movie, Thor Ragnarok, was also very focused on comedy, and people really liked that one. So for this one, they just decided to go all out with it, but in doing that, they kinda made the movie way too silly. Yeah, Ragnarok was also very comedy focused, but there it was much less exaggerated, and scenes didn't come to a complete stop just because of it. But I placed this movie on this spot for a reason, because believe it or not, I don't completely hate this movie. In fact, I've actually kinda grown to like it. I don't love it or anything, but for what it is, I think it's a pretty fun Thor adventure movie. That's really all it is, a fun, dumb, turn-off-your-brain movie, and sometimes that's all a movie needs to be. Just a very fun action movie that I can just have a good time with. I absolutely hate those screaming goats though, oh my god.
It could be in this very room. It could be you. It could be me.
Secret Invasion. Now, I wasn't actually planning on including this show originally, but seeing as the last episode came out right around the time I was writing this script, I thought I might as well check it out. Now, as you may have heard, some people really didn't like this show, going so far as to only receive a 56% critics ranking on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, where do I stand on it? Well, I actually kind of enjoyed it. This show is the continuation of the plotline set up in Captain Marvel, following Nick Fury as he unravels a plot by a group of aliens called Skrulls in their plan to exterminate the human race. What I enjoyed about this show was how grounded it felt. Outside of the last episode and the fact that it's about aliens invading Earth, it doesn't really have many fantastical elements to it. It's not really a superhero show, it's more of a spy drama, which I really did enjoy. Another part of this show I enjoyed is, of course, Nick Fury himself. I always liked Nick Fury, but I never felt like you really got to know him all that well. In all the other Marvel movies, he's mostly just there to stand around and bring the Avengers together. Here, however, we see an older, more washed up Nick Fury who's been changed by the blip, and who just wants what's best for the Skrulls and the human race. Speaking of the Skrulls, I think they were a really fun part of the show as well. Since they're shapeshifters, you never know who could turn out to be a Skrull all along, and that aspect I really enjoyed. But again, it's not perfect. Far from it, actually. Namely, the finale. The final episode really put a bad taste in my mouth. The entire show up until this point had been relatively grounded and serious, and then they go and introduce this whole plotline with a bunch of the Avengers' DNA being stored in this little tube that can give you the powers of all the Avengers, and then this whole CGI final battle, and it's just so generic. This final episode just felt really rushed and didn't feel like it matched the tone of the rest of the show at all. So yeah, while there are many aspects of it that I did like, overall, I really think they should have gone a different route with it. Probably would have fit better as a movie, if I'm honest. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is just okay. This was the second one of the Disney Plus MCU shows to be released, and between this, WandaVision, and Loki, yeah, this one is definitely the weakest. The show is pretty much a buddy cop show with Sam and Bucky as the cops, except instead of them being cops, they're superheroes, and instead of being good like a cop show, it's just kind of okay. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a bad show. I'd even go so far to say that it has stuff in it that's outright great, but overall, I just didn't really get into it that much. In this show, we follow Sam Wilson, aka the Falcon, and Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, as they're teamed up to stop this terrorist organization called the Flag Smashers, who want the world to return to the way it was before the Thanos snap. Now, this concept is very interesting. I really like seeing the effects that the Thanos snap had on the world, and the Flag Smashers are an excellent example of that. There were other parts of the show I enjoyed too, such as the way they handled John Walker, the action, and I really liked seeing some of the more personal, everyday aspects of Sam and Bucky's lives, such as Sam's family and Bucky going to therapy. But even with all that, I'd say overall the show is just kind of okay. Not bad by any means, just a perfectly serviceable superhero show.
Why won't you adopt me?
Because you're black!
Widow.
Black Widow. This movie was the first movie in the fourth phase of the MCU, and it had been really long awaited. Yeah, this movie went through a lot of delays, being talked about ever since the release of the first Avengers movie. And after years of waiting, it finally got a release date of May 2020. November 2020. May 2021. Wait, actually no, July 2021. So after waiting so long for this movie, was it worth it? Well, okay, let me just start by saying that this movie is not a bad movie in any sense of the word. It's actually quite fun. This movie is set in the time period between Civil War and Infinity War and follows Natasha and her sister Yelena as they try to take down the Red Room, the program that originally turned them into Black Widows, with the help of their mom and dad. My favorite part of this movie definitely has to be Natasha's family. They're all just so much fun to be around, especially her sister and her dad. They really did a good job at making Yelena's character feel like a little sister, and her dad, the Red Guardian, is also a lot of fun. He just brings so much energy to any scene he's in, and I'd love to see more of him in the future. Kinda reminds me of another character in a mediocre movie. But again, with most mid-tier Marvel movies, the weakest part is definitely the villain. Well, two villains actually. First, we've got the leader of the Red Room, Dreykov, who's actually a really good villain. He's very intimidating and creepy, and you never know what his next move is gonna be. The problem with him, however, is that you don't really get to see much of him until the last third of the movie. For how great of a villain he is and how big of a threat he is, I really wish we could have gotten to see more of him throughout the movie. Then the other villain is Taskmaster, who again is also really underused. Yeah, they're in the movie more than Dreykov, but you never really get to know them all that well. All we really know about them is that they want revenge on Natasha for something she did to them, but beyond that, we don't really get to know much. So yeah, overall, I'd say Black Widow was a pretty serviceable Marvel movie, but it had the chance to be a lot more.
Dormammu, let's play 8-ball.
Doctor Strange is what I'd probably call the most middle-of-the-road Marvel movie. It's not inherently awful like some of the other movies, but it's also not incredibly good either. It's just simply okay. The best part of the movie definitely has to be the visuals. Man, what a beautiful and creative style for a movie. Every time the characters use magic and the world starts turning into these odd kaleidoscope-looking visuals, I just can't look away from the screen. And that scene where Doctor Strange first realizes magic exists and he goes on that crazy psychedelic-looking drug trip, man, that's such a good scene. But outside of the ideas and effects of this movie, yeah, this movie doesn't really do much for me. The plot is pretty much as generic as it gets. It's got the quippy Marvel humor, the funny side characters, the love interest, the great actor made to play a forgettable villain who I don't remember the name of. It's all just standard Marvel stuff. But like, that's not a bad thing or anything. Like, it is a good movie. I just wouldn't go in expecting to be blown away outside of the stunning visuals and effects. Captain America, the first Avenger, is pretty good. I've always had a lot of enjoyment in this movie. Is it the best MCU movie? No. Is it the most exciting MCU movie? No. But is it still a very fun World War II adventure movie with a lot of fun moments and cool characters? Definitely. The best part of this movie for me was always the time period they chose to set it in. This movie takes place in World War II back in the 40s, and goddamn, they really did a good job of really making it feel like that time period. The characters also all really feel like actual people. I know that should be obvious, but for this franchise, that can come as a surprise sometimes. And who doesn't love Steve Rogers in this movie? He's the perfect example of a character who's just simply pure of heart. Yeah, if you think about it, Steve Rogers doesn't really have many flaws to his character. He's always pure of heart and always wants to do the right thing. Now, if this was any other movie, that would probably be a problem, but I think it's handled very well here. Sometimes you just want to watch a character who's just a good guy, and that's exactly what Steve is. That being said, again, the movie is not perfect. For example, the villain. I was honestly pretty disappointed with the portrayal of Red Skull in this movie. I mean, look at him in the comics. Look at how scary he looks. He honestly seems like a real threat here. In this movie, however, he just kind of looks like a guy in a red mask, which, you know, is what he is. But other than that, I think overall, Captain America the First Avenger is a pretty good movie, especially that ending. God, that ending hits hard.
Shut your goddamn mouth.
Oh my god, it's a hornet! Ah!
Ant-Man and the Wasp is fun, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. This movie came out in that weird time between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. This movie, along with Captain Marvel, came out in that time, and between the two, this one is undoubtedly the best. This movie is, at its core, just like the first one, a fun comedy heist movie that just so happens to involve superhero elements. That's what I like about these movies. They're just, you know, fun. This movie pretty much takes the ideas from the first one and just go all out with it. There's a lot of chases, a lot of characters with different motivations, and a lot of cool action scenes. The way they use the shrinking and growing larger powers in this movie is just so much fun to watch, especially that car chase scene. A bunch of characters are all chasing each other who all want the specific item, being Hank Pym's lab. There's a bunch of guys on bikes with guns chasing the main characters, then Hope picks up this Hello Kitty pest dispenser, throws it, and makes it bigger. God damn, that is so cool. There are so many other cool ideas like that in this movie, like storing a bunch of shrunken cars in a Hot Wheels rally case, then just unshrinking them and boom, you've got a car. The movie can also get a bit emotional sometimes. The whole plot of this movie is about bringing back Hank Pym's wife Janet from the quantum realm, and when they eventually do, it's a very well done scene. I guess that's the best way I can describe this movie. It's just a well done movie. I mean, I can't really think of any problems with it. The only reason I placed it at this spot is because, well, there are just a lot of MCU projects that I just like more. That being said, Ant-Man and the Wasp is still a pretty good movie.
What if I told you that I love you?
What If ... is currently the first and only animated project in the MCU. And is it good? Yeah, I'd say so. This show is different from the others, being that it's an anthology show. What that means is that instead of focusing on one continuous story throughout the entire series, each episode is its own self-contained story that can be enjoyed without having to watch the other episodes. The whole idea of this show is getting to see moments from different MCU movies where one thing is changed, leading to the story changing, such as if T'Challa got taken by the Ravengers instead of Peter Quill, or if all the Avengers were suddenly murdered before the events of the first Avengers movie. The way they do this is by having each episode be in a different universe, all being watched over by this being called the Watcher, who's also the narrator of the show. I always really liked this show, and I'd even go so far as to say it's actually pretty underrated. With it being an anthology show, it makes each episode something new, and you're always excited to see what scenario they're gonna explore next. Some of my favorite episodes being the Killmonger episode, the Murder Mystery episode, and my favorite, the Doctor Strange episode. I think most people will agree with me when I say that this is the best episode. I really enjoyed seeing Doctor Strange go down this dark path and try to get Christine back from the dead, and damn, that ending really hits hard. Now, with an anthology series, not every episode is going to be a winner, such as the Party Thor episode, and especially the Zombies episode. In my opinion, I think this was definitely the weakest episode, which is a shame too because the concept had a lot of potential. I just didn't really feel like the characters treated the situation that seriously. For what is a very dark and grim zombie apocalypse story, the way the characters acted just felt like any other MCU movie. Another weak part of the series for me was the ending. The final 2 episodes basically take all the characters from the previous 8 episodes and bring them all together in an Avengers-style crossover, which really wasn't necessary. I would have been perfectly content if the series was just an anthology series with episodes that could stand on their own, but of course they had to make everything seem connected. So while it's not perfect, I still greatly enjoyed What If ... and I'm pretty excited to see what they do with the second season, whenever that's coming out.
Well, I can turn myself into a wolf.
Werewolf by Night is frickin' sweet! Now this is what I love seeing from the MCU. A black and white homage to early horror movies with a spooky atmosphere and a bunch of blood. Hell yeah! This is one of the first Marvel special presentations that have been made, and out of the entire MCU, this one definitely stands out the most. I mean, it's in an entirely different genre, being horror. Yeah, Multiverse of Madness also had some horror elements, but this is just straight up horror, and I absolutely love it. It's amazing how they were able to make an interesting story with fun characters in a special that's only around 50 minutes long. I absolutely adore the setting, the effects, and especially the cinematography. Look at this, how is this from a Marvel project? I especially love the scene where Jack Russell transforms into his werewolf form. It's so well done, and I love how you don't actually get to see the transformation, instead only seeing his shadow as Elsa watches in horror. So, by the way I'm talking about it, it sounds perfect, right? Well, yeah, I suppose you could call it that, but the reason it isn't higher up on the list for me is because it just didn't grab me as much as some of the other MCU projects. I mean, it's only around 50 minutes, and in that time, you don't really get to know the characters as much as I'd like to. As it stands, I think it's a very fun and unique special that I'll definitely be watching every Halloween, but I do wish we got a little more from it, and I hope we see the characters again in future MCU projects. WandaVision WandaVision. Now, WandaVision was the first MCU show to be produced. No, Daredevil doesn't count. And unlike the shows that would follow, where it could probably work just as well as a movie, this show could not work as anything other than a show. It's formatted like a sitcom, with every episode following Wanda and Vision on their wacky shenanigans in a town called Westview. Every episode emulates the style of a different era of sitcoms, going from the 50s, the 60s, then going to color in the 70s, all the way up to the 2000s. I really enjoyed this aspect of the show. It was so fun seeing all these different eras, and the creators really did a good job at replicating the style and feel of old sitcoms. Even the actors changed their performances depending on the era, which really helps immerse you. Another really great part of the show for me was the whole mystery aspect of it. I found it really interesting how throughout the episodes they leave little hints and clues to what was going on, but never fully revealing it until later in the series. For example, in one episode, Wanda and Vision randomly come face to face with a beekeeper that crawled out of a sewer. Pretty random, right? Well, in a later episode, we find out that that beekeeper was actually someone from outside trying to get into Wanda's world. I really like how the show did stuff like that, and for the first few episodes, that's really all the show was. Until of course near the end when it's finally revealed that the world the show takes place in was all made up by Wanda to cope with her depression after she lost Vision in Infinity War. I think most people can agree that the final episode is definitely the weakest one. I like the episode prior where we get to learn Wanda's backstory, but this final one, yeah, it just kinda turned into your typical Marvel third act at the end. Mind you, not a bad Marvel third act, just nothing really to write home about, especially when the series up to that point had been so great in my mind. When you're far away from home. Now we're entering the MCU projects that I really like. Not to say I didn't like many of the projects before this, it's just that they've either not completely lived up to the hype, or were great overall and had a few minor flaws that brought it down for me. From now on though, I'm gonna be talking about projects that I overall think are good, starting with Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, Far From Home was the first movie to come out after the huge event that was Avengers Endgame, and in the movie you can really feel the effects of what happened after Endgame. Tony Stark is now gone, and throughout this movie, Peter's trying to figure out how to live up to Iron Man's legacy. This is what I would call the only real flaw with the movie for me. So much of it is focused on Iron Man and how Peter wants to live up to him, but in doing that, it kinda stops feeling like a Spider-Man movie and more like an Iron Man tribute movie. Not to say that's a bad thing, it just kinda takes the movie's identity away a bit, considering it is a Spider-Man movie. But other than that, I think this movie is really fun. It goes for the same style and tone as the previous MCU Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Homecoming, except this time, instead of taking place in New York, it takes place in Europe, since the plot centers on Peter's class taking a trip all throughout Europe, as Peter teams up with this new superhero called Mysterio, who's definitely 100% a good guy who'd never betray Peter in any way. Yeah, Mysterio is definitely the best part of this movie. I love how throughout half the movie, Peter is convinced he's a good guy, and even though he's a villain in the comics, somehow through the way he's acted, the audience kinda starts to believe he's a good guy too, until that one scene where everything is revealed and we find out Mysterio is the villain. Not only is he a great twist villain, but he's also just a great villain in general, especially that one scene where Peter gets trapped in the Mysterio illusions, which is just such a cool scene. So, while it is the least good movie of the MCU Spider-Man trilogy, I still think it's a really good movie, which should tell you a lot about this trilogy. Hawkeye. Man, I had so much fun with this. This show kinda just felt like it came and went, probably because it came out around the same time as No Way Home, so I didn't really see many people talk about it. That being said, I really like the series. I just love the overall vibe of this show. It takes place during Christmas time in the city of New York, and that just gives it such a cozy feel. My favorite part of the series definitely has to be the relationship between Hawkeye and Kate Bishop. They just have such a fun dynamic, with Kate being a massive fan and Clint just trying to keep her safe and out of trouble. Now, even though the series is called Hawkeye, the main character here is Kate Bishop, who I think was a really well done character. Out of all the Avengers 2.0 characters they've been doing, she's definitely my favorite. First of all, she doesn't feel like a copycat of Hawkeye. She has her own style of doing things, with her being less experienced and still figuring things out. And second of all, she's just a very fun character. Throughout the series, you really start to care about the situation she's in, with people thinking she's Ronin and the whole situation with her mom's fiance. Then, of course, we've got Hawkeye himself. They really did a good job at fleshing Hawkeye's character out in this series. To me, he was always just kind of the Avenger who was just there in the previous movies. I can't say I hated him or anything, he was just the least interesting one. I mean, in a team where you've got a man who can turn into a green monster, an American super soldier, and a literal god, the middle-aged guy with a bow and arrow isn't really the one that stands out the most. But man, in this series, they really expanded his character. You get to see more of his family, and you really start to care about them. He makes a promise to his family that he'll be home by Christmas, and as the series goes along, you actually really start to get worried if he'll make it or not, and when he finally does in the end, you actually feel really relieved. He really cares about his family, and I really love that aspect of his character. But he also has a darker side, since for years he operated as the deadly Ronin, probably killing a lot of people, showing that even though people see him as a hero, he still has the dark side to him. Just like the real Jeremy Renner! Now, if I were to have one complaint with the series, it would be how they handled Kingpin. So you bring back this fan-favorite character from the Daredevil show, only to have him be in the last episode, and then kill him off? Why would you introduce him if you're just gonna kill him off right after? I figured they want to keep him around for like a Spider-Man movie or something, but no, shot to the face. But overall, I think this series was pretty solid. It doesn't really break any new ground in terms of storytelling. It's pretty much your standard Marvel story, but for what it is, I really think they did a good job with the show, and I can't wait to see what they do with the characters in the future. Also, Lucky the Pizza Dog. That's it.
I'm a little girl and I won't get spotted. I'm a little girl and I won't get spotted.
Miss Marvel. Now, when I saw the trailers for this, I wasn't really interested at all. This was around the time when MCU projects were just coming out left and right, and personally, I really didn't have any desire to watch this. But one day I was bored, so I decided to give it a shot. And man, I really underestimated this show. Why didn't anybody tell me this show was actually good? I love the style of these first few episodes. The way they incorporate the way Kamala thinks into the visuals with these little drawings and graffiti everywhere was just such a unique style. Not only does it look cool, but it also really fits Kamala's character, since she often daydreams and likes to draw. This was honestly what really hooked me into the show. It really reminded me of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Oh no, I mentioned Scott Pilgrim. Run for your life! Sadly though, they don't incorporate this style throughout the entire series, which honestly was a big letdown for me. Those first few episodes were so creatively done, so it was really disappointing to see them abandon it in the middle, even if it comes back a bit during the end. Another weird thing with this show is how they decided to change Miss Marvel's powers from the stretchy powers to these crystal powers instead. It's just so weird. I mean, the stretchy powers are her whole thing. It's like if you decided to take away the webs from Spider-Man, it just doesn't feel the same. The reason they did this is because they're going to be introducing the Fantastic Four in the MCU, so they didn't want people to be confused since Mr. Fantastic pretty much has the same powers in the comics. But like, it's not like characters having the same powers was a problem before the MCU. She-Hulk is the same as Hulk, Wasp is the same as Ant-Man, heck, War Machine is pretty much just a palette-swapped Iron Man. So is Pepper in Endgame. And Ironheart. Whatever, I will never understood why they did this. Not saying the crystal powers are bad or anything, I actually think they look cool, but I do kinda wish they would have kept them like how they are in the comics. Wait, No, I'm becoming a comics purist. No, I don't want this. No, I take it back. The crystal powers are cool and I love the MCU. MCU forever!
Ants. Ant-Man.
The first Ant-Man movie is what I would probably call the most underrated Marvel movie. Yeah, whenever this movie is brought up, I don't really hear many people praise it. They either call it just forgettable or mediocre. I, however, can't really see where those people are coming from at all. This movie is fun, come on guys. Yes, the movie isn't the best thing in the world. Yes, it does have its flaws. Yes, the plot is sort of generic. Yes, the villain is pretty forgettable. But even with all that, I still really like this movie. It seems like the biggest problem people have with this movie is that the plot is pretty generic and similar to other superhero movies, most notably Iron Man. But like, no? These movies couldn't be any more different. Why? Is it because they're both about superheroes in metal suits who fight bald guys in similar yet different suits because the bald guy wants the technology for themselves to do nefarious deeds? Well, wait a minute. But yeah, outside the general plot synopsis and the fact that they both have man in the title, these movies really couldn't be more different. First of all, Ant-Man isn't really a superhero movie. I mean, it is, but if you simply look at what happens in it, it's really a heist movie that also happens to feature superhero elements. It has a good cast, good effects, good action. Everything in this movie is just very solid. I mean, that final fight on the toy train set is just such a creative scene. I really wish they did more of this in the other Ant-Man movies, because I'd much rather take stuff like this, rather than whatever the hell Quantumania was.
Your mom is so evil.
Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is a really fun movie. Yeah, this has kind of become an unpopular opinion, but I really did enjoy this movie. It seems like people are kind of divided on this one. Either you think it's a really fun and unique movie, or you think it's the absolute worst thing ever created. And like, I can see why people have problems with this movie. Wanda's the antagonist here, and they spend pretty much no time at all setting her up as a villain. She pretty much goes from, I'm lonely and I miss my children, to, I'm gonna murder all these people and this random teenager in the span of like one scene. I really wish they would have developed her more as a villain. I don't know, maybe throughout the movie have her do more and more selfish things until eventually she becomes irredeemable. You know, just kind of slowly build it up. Screw it, make her like Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith. She's already got the murdering children part down. So yeah, this movie definitely has a lot of flaws, and if I wanted to, I could sit here and nitpick this movie all day. Like how for being a multiverse movie, they only explore 3 different universes, how America Chavez is a little underused, and how they don't really use their magic that much, but like, I don't really care. This movie is just so much fun. It's directed by Sam Raimi, who's known for the original Spider-Man trilogy as well as the Evil Dead movies, and you can really tell. Yeah, there's quite a lot of horror elements in this, and at times it really pushes its PG-13 rating. It actually has a fair bit of gore in it, not to the extent of an R rating, but it's definitely close to it. This movie just felt so fresh to me. The way it's shot and the way it's edited really gives it its own identity. I don't know what it is, but it feels much more alive than the other Marvel movies. For example, compare New York and Spider-Man No Way Home to this movie. Here the colors just pop a lot more, probably because they opted to use a lot of real sets for a lot of scenes, which really helps immerse you. So, while it wasn't the Avengers level event that people were expecting, with cameos left and right from Wolverine and Tom Cruise Iron Man, to me, it was still an absolutely amazing time that I always have fun rewatching. Although I gotta say the CGI on Strange's third eye was pretty bad. It looks like something out of Annoying Orange.
3, that's a magic number.
Iron Man 3. So remember when I said Ant-Man was the most underrated MCU movie? Well, I take it back. Iron Man 3 gets that title. I don't really see people talk about this movie that much, which really is a shame because it's honestly really good. This movie is one of those ones that when you watch it on its own, it's a pretty fun, good movie, but when you look at it in the grand scheme of the MCU, it kind of starts to fall apart. Like, at the end of this movie, it seems like Tony kind of retires from being Iron Man. He has this whole inspirational speech about it and everything, and then in the next Avengers movie, there he is, back as Iron Man like nothing happened. Yeah, it doesn't really have a grand effect on the MCU, it's just a self-contained story that doesn't really lead into anything else. Now, for some, that may be a big deal breaker. However, for me, who just likes good movies regardless of if they connect to other movies,
We do not care.
I love how Tony is kind of knocked down a peg here. In a big part of this movie, he gets put in a position where he doesn't have access to his suits, his mansion, or any of his technology, and he has to use his intelligence to figure things out, which I really did enjoy. It shows you that even when you take away his Iron Man suit, he is still a very smart person. And then of course we got the villain. No, not that one, the fake one. This is probably the biggest controversy around this movie, many going so far as to say it ruined the movie for them. And like, yeah, I guess it's kind of a dumb twist, but come on guys, it wasn't that bad. Basically, throughout the whole movie, we think this guy's this big evil terrorist called the Mandarin. However, it's revealed later that it's actually just a British actor named Trevor who was hired by the real villain. People did not like this twist at all at the time, and it's definitely the most criticized part of the movie. This is because the Mandarin was already a character in the comics, and there he was actually portrayed as an actual villain. And like, yeah, I guess if you're really into Marvel, this would be a bit of a disappointment, but as someone who only watches the movies, again,
We do not care.
at least now with Shang-Chi, we've got the real Mandarin in the MCU, so that's nice. Now the nerds can die happy. So yeah, I'd say Iron Man 3 still holds up very well today, and it's absolutely worth a watch. Okay, hold on guys, I'm just gonna go to the bathroom real quick.
Bacon, bacon, bacon.
The Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special is really stupid, and I love it for that. This is another one of those special presentations, this time themed around the Guardians of the Galaxy around Christmas time. I just find it really funny that Marvel and James Gunn sat down one day and decided to make a Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. It's just the most random, insane idea ever, but somehow they actually managed to make it woke. Woke? I wrote work. It's just a funny little Christmas special, and it does everything it sets out to do. Mantis and Drax want to make Peter happy on Christmas, so they decide to go to Kevin Bacon's house and kidnap him as a Christmas gift. That is the best plot to anything ever. I just love the reaction that Peter gives when he realizes what's going on. The line, "This isn't a Christmas gift, this is human trafficking," has forever been etched into my mind, and I absolutely love James Gunn for it. I just love the smallest little things. The way Drax obsesses over his funny little man, the way he says "we hate you" to Kevin Bacon, and this scene where Rocket is talking and Drax just points at him. I don't know, it shouldn't be funny. It's literally just a character pointing to another character, but it's like the funniest thing to me. I think I just like any scene with Drax in it. Can we please get more of Drax? That's the Disney Plus series I want to watch. So yeah, while it's not really anything groundbreaking, I will always treasure it near and dear to my heart, and I'll be sure to watch it once every Christmas. Or once every day. Hold on, I'm gonna go watch it again. I need my daily dose of Drax and his funny little man.
Under the sea. Under the sea.
Black Panther Wakanda Forever was probably the movie that from the beginning was the hardest to pull off. Yeah, the actor for Black Panther, Chadwick Boseman, passed away before this movie was made, so it's really a miracle this movie even came out to begin with. So did they manage to pull it off? Well, I'd say they did. From the start of the movie, you're already hit with sadness, with T'Challa dying of an unknown illness and the characters mourning his death. This was really the most respectful send-off you could have given this character. He doesn't die in battle or by being betrayed, he simply dies of an illness, which, for as sad as it is just something that happens in real life sometimes, and the other characters are just forced to deal with that. Illness is a part of life that we all need to deal with, especially recently with the COVID pandemic where a lot of people lost someone close to them. Man, good thing all the characters in this movie got the vaccine so they didn't get the virus. Right, Shuri? This whole movie, you can really feel T'Challa's absence. All the characters are lost and confused without their king, and his sister Shuri is struggling throughout the movie to live up to her brother, with her taking up the mantle as the Black Panther. The villain here is also great, being King Namor. I don't know how they did it, but they actually managed to make this goofy-ass guy from the comics into an actual threat, but somehow they did it. Like, look at this dude. He's got little wings on his feet. No way he'll ever work in live action. Oh my god, this dude's a badass! Now, while I do enjoy this movie quite a lot, I wouldn't really say it's as good as the original. A lot of that obviously being because of the absence of T'Challa. Of course, that's no fault of the makers of this movie, but you just feel like something's missing in it with him not being there. That being said, it is still a good Black Panther movie, just not as good as the first.
Hi, Barbie.
Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Man, this one sure was a surprise. Before seeing this movie, I had no knowledge about the character of Shang-Chi. I had never even heard of him before, but now after watching it, man, I just want to know more. The biggest praise I have for this movie has to be the action. Man, I have never seen fighting like this before in the MCU. Like, I don't mind the CGI battles and the more hands-on combat of the Captain America movies, but like, damn, this is just on a whole other level. They actually use real martial arts in this movie, and it really works in the movie's favor, especially that bus scene in the beginning. That's just such a beautifully shot and choreographed scene. The action is not the only thing I love about this movie though. I actually really enjoyed the comedy in it. It's not too overdone, and the characters all really bounce off each other really well, especially Shang-Chi and his friend Katie. They are just so much fun to watch whenever they're on screen together. We also get the return of Trevor from Iron Man 3, and while I've heard a lot of people say he's a bit annoying here, I honestly found his character pretty charming. It was actually a nice surprise when I first watched it. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm one of those people who actually enjoy Iron Man 3. But the standout part of this movie is, without a shadow of a doubt, the relationship between Shang-Chi and his father Wenwu. I really love their dynamic here, with how Shang-Chi was trained since a child to basically be a soldier, and how he kinda resents his dad a bit for that. I love how throughout the movie, his dad is trying to prove that he can bring Shang-Chi's mom back, and when he gets proven wrong, he gives his life to save his son. It's just such an amazing scene, and I just love him as a villain overall. I love how when you first meet him, you think, okay, this guy's not too bad, but as the movie keeps going, you find out more and more about him, and you think, yeah, you know what, this guy is actually pretty messed up. But wait, there's someone I forgot to mention. Morris! Yeah, that's right, Morris! The best character in the movie! I love Morris. Furry little creature. Morris supremacy! We love Morris! Hashtag Morris for Smash!
The way I see it, you can't spell homecoming without alcohol poisoning.
No! Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, if you think about it, it's really a miracle that this or any of the other MCU Spider-Man movies exist. With the whole licensing being split up for Spider-Man between Disney and Sony, it's surprising to see that they decided to sign off on this movie. But damn, am I glad they did, because this is an excellent movie. The MCU Spider-Man movies have always been a little different to the ones that came before. They choose to focus a lot more on the whole high school aspect of Peter Parker's character, with the movie focusing on Peter trying to win the love of this girl named Liz, while also doing Spider-Man stuff. Along the way, he's also joined by his best friend Ned, who's actually a new character created specifically for the MCU, and what can I say, it's Ned. Do you know how much I'm trying to hold in the urge to say CEO of sex right now? MJ is also here in this movie, but she's more of a side character who just pops up in a few scenes. She isn't really a main character like she is in the other movies. I really love how this movie balances its superhero elements with Peter's everyday life. It's really the first live-action adaptation of the character to nail both the Spider-Man stuff and the Peter Parker stuff. Now, I do know people have their issues with this movie, most notably how it incorporates Iron Man. Iron Man is sort of a mentor figure to Peter here, and his Spider-Man suit is actually given to him by Tony. Many people think this is really lame and that Spider-Man shouldn't rely on Iron Man that much, but I don't know, it doesn't bother me too much. Keep in mind, this depiction of Peter Parker is a lot younger than the ones that came before, so it makes sense why he'd need a little extra help from someone like Iron Man. And I actually quite do like the more techie aspects of his suit. I know it's not everyone's thing, but I found it pretty neat. Then we've got the villain of this movie, being the Vulture. Man, what a great antagonist. Not only is he really threatening, but you also kind of sympathize with him. He's just a guy who's been screwed over. He just has very drastic means of getting what he wants. And that one scene where Peter is going to Liz's house and he realizes her father is the Vulture, and then slowly he starts figuring out Peter is Spider-Man. God, that's just such a well done scene. Everything in this movie is just very solid, and I honestly think it's up there as one of the best Spider-Man movies. Okay, I can't hold it in anymore. CEO of sex, hashtag NetSweep!
I understood that reference.
Well, here we are, the first Avengers movie. Words cannot describe how big this thing was when it came out. I mean, it did something no movie had ever done before. It took all these different characters from other movies and put them all together in this massive team-up event, and somehow they actually managed to pull it off. It's really a miracle this movie is as good as it is. I mean, with all these different characters from different movies with different directors and styles, you'd think it wouldn't work well together. However, it does. These characters all bounce off each other so well. I love the dynamic between Tony and Steve, I love how Bruce is always trying his best not to turn himself into the Hulk, and I just love this team altogether. The main villain here is Loki, following the events of the first Thor movie, and man, he's even better than this one than he was in Thor. This was really the movie that made people love Loki. I love how he's always plotting something behind the character's back, and you never know what he's gonna do next. And of course, that ending battle is what everything leads up to, and it is just so satisfying seeing all these characters that have been built up in previous movies come together and face off against a common foe. What more can I even say? It's the first Avengers movie. It's one of the highest grossing movies of all time for a reason, and it will continue to be a great movie for many years to come.
Wow.
So after the okay WandaVision and mediocre Falcon and the Winter Soldier, most people were kind of losing hope in the Marvel TV shows. Is this all these shows are gonna be like? Starting off strong then falling off in the end? Well, that all changed with Loki, because to me, this show was really strong all the way through. This show is weird. It deals with a lot of time travel, the multiverse, different variations of established characters, self-cessed, and it also opens up a lot of questions about the MCU universe, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, when you take a fan-favorite character like Loki and give him his own spin-off, that's obviously gonna be a success. But not only did they make this show great, but they also made it the first big step in the multiverse saga. Yeah, I'd say this is the true start of the multiverse saga. I mean, this is when we were first introduced to the multiverse, and the way they explain it with the branching paths has stuck to be the main way the multiverse is depicted, even in non-MCU movies like Across the Spider-Verse. I think I really enjoyed in this show was the buddy cop-like relationship between Loki and Mobius. They are just so much fun to watch together, with Loki always trying to be one step ahead and Mobius just trying to do his job, while also having some sort of respect for Loki. We've also got Sylvie, who's an alternate universe version of Loki. I really like her character. She's similar but not identical to Loki, and I really like the relationship she had with him. Although, I'd have to say, it's a little weird that she becomes a love interest for him in the end, considering they are technically the same person. I don't know, it's complicated, but I guess it makes sense that the only person Loki could truly learn to love is another version of himself. That finale also leaves a lot of open room for things in the future, with Sylvie killing He Who Remains, effectively releasing all of his variants and setting up the events of the multiverse saga. I'm really excited to see where they go with this in season 2, and you know for a fact I will be watching it when it comes out.
I was living the life, yes I was having so much fun, I was winning awards I didn't even know I won.
This is it, the one that started it all, the first MCU movie, the movie that is to blame for all these wasted hours of watching superhero movies, Iron Man. You know, going back to watch this movie really shows how different the MCU was when it started. It just has like a different tone to it, you know? It doesn't have any aliens or time travel or multiverse shenanigans. It's overall a pretty grounded story. And that's exactly what makes it so great. It's a classic story. The rich, selfish businessman who makes missiles named Tony Stark gets kidnapped by terrorists who want him to build a bomb. However, instead, he constructs a suit which allows him to escape. Then when he comes home to his normal life, he comes back as a changed man who now wants to do good in the world. The story arc in this movie has always been really solid. It's always really satisfying seeing Tony go through this arc. He starts out by being just this narcissistic rich guy who doesn't care if the weapons he creates does harm in the world. But then when he gets kidnapped, he sees face on the horrible things that his weapons have done. And when he gets back home, he stops producing them because of his change of heart. It's just a classic story, you know? I've always had a soft spot for selfish person becomes selfless stories, and this movie always did that really well. The strongest part of this movie is definitely that first half. I'd say all of the stuff with him being stuck in the cave is perfect. The second half is also pretty strong with him building and testing out his suit. However, the third act is kind of where the movie falls apart for me. I'm not saying it's bad or anything, it's just pretty generic. Obadiah Stane was never really that much of an interesting villain to me. Outside the funny box of scraps scene, there's not really much to him, and the final battle with him versus Tony in the Ironmonger suit just felt, I don't know, a bit forced. Not saying the final act brings the movie down though, it's still an incredibly strong first movie, and it's absolutely gonna remain a classic for years to come.
Wakanda Forever!
Black Panther. Man, words cannot describe how hyped up of a movie this was when it was coming out. You really had to be there in the moment. People were going crazy over this thing, many even saying it was gonna be the best MCU movie to date. Now, I wouldn't call it the best MCU movie, but I still found it a really solid movie with some great characters and also with some great concepts. So let's get the bad out of the way first. The CGI. Yeah, surprisingly, that's the biggest issue I have with this movie. The CGI just felt very, how do I say it, lifeless? Now, I'm not talking about Wakanda. Wakanda itself looks absolutely beautiful. It's mostly the fight scenes I have an issue with, especially in the third act. Look at this, it just looks so off. Doesn't look like real people fighting, you know? It looks like a cutscene from a video game, and when it's the final act of the movie, yeah, that's sort of an issue. Now, with that out of the way, we can finally talk about what this movie does right, such as the world building. Man, they did such a good job at making Wakanda feel like an actual place. For as much as I like Asgard in the Thor movies, I'll be honest that the world there isn't really explored as much as I'd like to. Here in Black Panther, however, I feel the exact opposite. The culture, the beliefs, the way they fight, it's all just so well done, and you can really tell they did their homework on actual African cultures. And of course, we've got what is in my opinion the highlight of this movie, that being the villain, Killmonger. Man, what an amazing antagonist. I just love the way he speaks, his really commanding presence, and also a lot of the things he has to say. Yeah, the interesting part about his character is that
Well, a lot of things he says aren't necessarily wrong. I mean, yeah, he is the antagonist, and he does do a lot of messed up things, but when you only look at the things he wants and his philosophies, you kinda sort of agree with him a little bit, which is one of the reasons that makes him so great. I'd even go so far as to call him the greatest villain in the MCU. He really is that good. So while Black Panther does have some things in it that does bring it down for me a little bit, the things that make it good really makes it good. Thor Ragnarok. Here we go, the actual good Thor movie. Yeah, the Thor movies are very weird in that sense, because there's only really one of them that are truly great, being this one, and man, compared to the other ones, Ragnarok is a damn masterpiece. It goes for a different tone compared to the first two, being a lot more comedy focused. I really love how they incorporated the more weird and silly aspects from the MCU into this movie. It's really what makes it so great. And unlike Love and Thunder, the jokes here are actually funny. It also takes the whole idea of the fish out of water story from the first Thor movie, and just does it a lot better. Here, instead of being stuck in boring old New Mexico, Thor gets stuck on this weird alien planet ruled by the Grand Master, played by Jeff Goldblum. Man, what a fun character. Jeff Goldblum is always a fun actor to watch, and I love how fun and snarky he is. Especially when you compare him to the previous movie's villain, who I can't even remember the name of. That should really show you how good this movie is compared to the previous ones. It really is the perfect Thor movie. Speaking of Thor, this is definitely the Thor movie where they did his character best. He's kind of knocked down a few pegs here, with him losing his hammer, his father, and being thrown out of Asgard when his sister Hela takes over. Pretty much all the characters are perfect here. I love Hela as a villain, Loki is fun like always, Korg and Meek are absolutely hilarious here and aren't annoying like they are in Love and Thunder, and of course, we've got the Hulk. It was a really nice surprise to see the Hulk be incorporated into this movie, but it does make sense. Last time we saw him, he was in Age of Ultron, which pretty much ends with him flying away in the Quinjet, and after that, we didn't really get to see him for a while, until he ends up in this movie. They really did a good job at fleshing out his character here too. You really get to understand the struggle between the Hulk and Bruce Banner, with them both wanting to be in control, and you do end up feeling kinda bad for him. It's really funny to me that the movie that does the Hulk's character the best isn't even a Hulk movie. I don't know, I just found that kind of funny. And the whole third act of this movie is just so awesome. The whole scene with Thor unlocking his thunder abilities and the Hulk coming in at the end and Asgard getting destroyed, man, it's just such a great ending to what already is an amazing movie. Man, if there only was a sequel to this movie. Oh well, I guess there were just no other Thor movies that were ever made. How sad.
Who the hell is Cucky?
Captain America the Winter Soldier is really good, and I like it. I put a little cat face in the script, by the way, for context. So, I like the first Captain America movie already. It's a fun World War II action movie, not anything amazing, but a fine movie. This one, however, man, it just took things to a whole other level. It pretty much takes everything that the first movie did well, and just does it even better. This movie takes place after the first Avengers movie, and follows Steve Rogers as he's trying to get used to the new world he's finding himself in. Yeah, a lot of stuff has happened to him since he got frozen. The entire world has advanced, his girlfriend is now an old woman, and his best friend Bucky is dead. Or is he? Somehow Bucky returned. Yeah, in this movie we get the return of Bucky, now known as the Winter Soldier. I really like the whole story arc with him. That scene where Steve first finds out Bucky is alive and he just goes, "Who the hell is Bucky?" Mwah! Chef's kiss, such a good scene. Basically, after he fell off the train in the first movie, he was found by people working for Hydra, who basically turned him into a brainwashed super soldier who they used as an assassin. You really kind of feel bad for him in this movie. He's doing all of this against his will, and when he finally snaps at the end and he gets out of his brainwashed state and he finally remembers Steve, it's a really powerful scene. This movie is just a really solid and enjoyable action movie. The effects are great, the characters are all great, and the story arc is just really solid. I don't know, it's kind of hard to talk about this movie. It's just good. I can't really think of anything that really bothered me about it. It's just a really good action movie. What else can I say? Moon Knight. Now, this will definitely be my most unpopular opinion, because a lot of people don't really like Moon Knight. I guess it's because he's not as accurate to the comics as people would like to, and yeah, I get that, but as someone who's never even heard of Moon Knight before the show came out, yeah, I have to say I really love this show. Man, I really love the things this show did. It tackled so many different topics, such as identity, one's sense of self, and mental illness, and I really think they handled it in the best possible way they could. With a character like Moon Knight, you kind of have to touch on these kinds of topics, and I really think they did it with a lot of respect.
Steven and Mark are both such interesting characters, and they really have a great dynamic. I love how at first they're just kind of annoyed with each other, but as the show goes along, they learn to accept each other in the same body. And that fight scene at the end when they're both switching between Mr. Knight and Moon Knight, man, that's just such an awesome scene. Going in blind is definitely the best way to experience this show. It really messes with your mind, especially during the final few episodes. Man, I'm telling you, this show throws so many twists and turns at you, and sometimes you even question if anything that happened in the show was even real to begin with. I really like stories that can do that to you. It's why I love movies like Shutter Island and games like Alan Wake. I adore pieces of media that can just mess with your mind like that, and Moon Knight is an excellent example of that. But of course, there are a lot of elements outside of that makes the show great. I really love the characters, the effects, and especially the soundtrack. Man, the music of this show is so good. It's also a little more violent than your typical MCU show. Yeah, there's quite a bit of violence here, and I really did enjoy that. From what I've heard, Moon Knight has always been kind of a more violent character, so it makes sense to have the show based on him be a little more violent too. So to me, Moon Knight was an absolutely amazing show that I would absolutely recommend to fans of superheroes or just people who like a great story, because you don't really need to watch anything other in the MCU to understand this show, which really is a nice breath of fresh air. So, Avengers Endgame. Man, I love this movie. This movie probably holds the title as the most hyped up MCU movie. Everyone was excited to see this movie. The last Avengers movie, Avengers Infinity War, ended on a huge cliffhanger, and people had to wait a whole year to see this next one. And man, were people excited. So, did it end up living up to the hype? Yeah, I'd definitely say so. Now, I do know people have their problems with this movie, and I can kinda see why. It does have more of a messy plot, with all the time traveling opening up a few plot holes, and the fact that the Thanos they find in the end isn't the same one as the one from Infinity War. Yeah, that was kind of a dumb decision. So, while I wouldn't say it's quite as good as Infinity War, man, if it still isn't a damn good movie. I really love how this movie kinda takes itself a bit more slowly. I mean, it is a very dark time for these characters. They've lost pretty much everyone they knew and loved, and for a lot of this movie, everything just kind of feels hopeless, until of course they discover that they can travel back in time. This movie is a lot more character focused than the other ones, and I really like that aspect. You really feel like you get to know these people, and I could honestly just watch a whole movie of these characters just sitting around and talking. But when the action hits, it does hit. The final battle of this movie is pretty much just a huge drawn out action scene. And man, it is just so exciting to see all these characters come together and fight against Thanos. This whole scene has just become so iconic. There's a reason the internet was flooded with recreations and memes of this scene back in 2019. It's just a very iconic part of the MCU. What else can I say? This movie is iconic for a reason. The way they took all these previous characters and movies and put them all together like this and actually made it work and feel satisfying, it's just such a miracle. And the characters they give send-offs to in this movie all feel really satisfying, especially the one for Steve. This scene right here is probably my favorite scene in any Marvel movie. After all the time traveling, all the battles, all the action, we simply end the movie on this scene of Steve finally getting to dance with Peggy. And man, if it isn't just the most beautiful send-off to this character and an amazing end to the Infinity Saga, what a special movie this is. Captain America Civil War. Controversial, I know. Many people would say Winter Soldier is better than this one, but I kinda like this one a little bit more. This movie kind of felt like what many people wanted Age of Ultron to be. I mean, it's pretty much got all the Avengers in it, so you could probably just call this movie Avengers 2.5 and people would probably agree with you. The movie is really good at weaving together multiple storylines. You'd think because of how much is going on in this movie, it would get a little too much, but it does a really good job at making everything feel connected and giving all major characters something to do. The conflict between Captain America and Iron Man is the main story here, stemming from their different views on the governmental oversight of superheroes. They did a really good job at making both these sides have good points. It's not like one is completely right and the other is completely wrong, no. They both have valid points and arguments, so when they all come together and fight in that airport battle, you're kind of rooting for both sides. And where it all leads to in the end with Tony finding out Bucky killed his parents, man, that's just such a heartbreaking scene. The movie also did a really good job at introducing many new characters. I mean, this was the first time we ever saw Black Panther and Spider-Man in the MCU, who would both go on to have hugely successful movies on their own. It also brought Ant-Man in with the rest of the Avengers, and he's always a fun inclusion. What more can I say? This movie is just a really good Marvel movie.
Oh, you don't think Jello is a good enemy? Well, that's why they put in a red Jello to fight also.
Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, duh. Obviously, this movie is going to be near the top of the list. What did you expect? This movie was such a breath of fresh air when it first came out. Yeah, nothing like this had really been done before the MCU. This movie just went all out with the weird, crazy, and wacky aspects of this universe, and it's probably the movie that's had the biggest impact on the MCU. I mean, without this movie, we probably never would have gotten movies like Thor Ragnarok or even Infinity War and Endgame. This movie is weird. I mean, it's got a talking raccoon and a tree as two of the main characters, and somehow they actually managed to make us emotionally invested in them, which really is one of the main reasons why James Gunn is such an excellent director. And the crazy thing is, before this movie, people didn't even know who the Guardians of the Galaxy even were. Yeah, now pretty much everyone knows Peter Quill, Rocket, Drax, Groot, but before this movie, they were kind of obscure. So it really is amazing how this one movie managed to make them instantly iconic. Everything in this movie is just done to perfection. The characters are all really likable and fun to watch. They're funny, but they've also got plenty of emotional moments too. I love it when a movie can do that. Have characters that are funny, but in a way where it doesn't interrupt the story. I'm looking at you, Love and Thunder. What else do I even need to say about this movie? You've probably already seen it, and for good reason too, because this movie really is one of the best of the best.
Tell me his name again.
Christopher Robin.
So, Avengers Infinity War. Yeah, it's the best Avengers movie, no doubt about it. This movie really took the world by storm when it was first coming out. Yeah, people were hyped up like crazy for this movie. I mean, this movie is pretty much what the entire MCU had been leading up to at that point, combining all these characters from 10 years of build-up into one massive superhero event. And I'll say, it definitely lived up to the hype. The standout aspect of this movie definitely has to be the characters. I mean, it's got characters from all different corners of the MCU, all with different personalities and powers, and they somehow managed to make all of it work seamlessly. That's always been the standout aspect of these movies. When Iron Man interacts with the Guardians of the Galaxy, Bruce Banner talking to Black Panther, Thor hanging out with Groot and Rocket, it all feels so natural. Even though the movies these characters come from all have wildly different tones, they manage to make it all work. And unlike some other Marvel movies, the witty banter between the characters actually work to make the connection between them stronger. Then, of course, we've got the standout aspect of this movie, Thanos. Man, what an interesting villain. He's really much more than your standard superhero antagonist. For starters, he's much more three-dimensional than many of the previous villains. Take Ultron, for example. His goal is pretty much just to destroy humanity because he thinks robots are superior. That's it. Yeah, outside of that, there's not really much to him, and when he gets defeated, we don't really care that much. Thanos, however, is a lot more complex. He has a pretty compelling motivation for his actions throughout the film. His primary goal is to restore balance to the universe by eliminating half of all life. And yeah, that's obviously bad, but you do see where he's coming from. He's more of a philosopher than a real villain. He's just not afraid to put his ideas into action, with him doing some pretty messed up things to get what he wants. That's what sets him apart from many of the other villains. He doesn't want the Infinity Stones because he wants power or to take over the world, no. He's doing it because he thinks it would do the world a favor, and he is right a little bit in that. On paper, that is, because when you actually take that idea and put it into the real world, you see how flawed it actually is. But despite everything, Thanos wins in the end. He actually succeeds in his goal of wiping out half of everyone in the entire universe, and when you watch it for the first time, it really comes as a surprise. Not many movies have the guts to do something like this, pretty much killing off a bunch of the MCU's most iconic and beloved heroes just like that. I mean, yeah, obviously they're not dead since they come back in the next movie, but when Infinity War first came out, you didn't know that, which is why this ending leaves such a big impact. This movie really will go down as one of the best superhero movies of all time, and no doubt the best Avengers movie.
I'm very poppin', y'all!
Now, while I think the first Guardians of the Galaxy is an absolutely outstanding movie, I do think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is just a little bit better. To me, this movie just took everything that the first one did great and just expanded on it, leading to what is, in my opinion, an even better movie. Now, I know there are a lot of people who prefer the first movie, and I understand why. There's not as much action, it's a lot longer than the first one, and it also doesn't have as much of the Guardians together as the first one, with Rocket and Groot being separated from the others for a lot of the movie. But honestly, the more slower character-centered scenes are kind of one of the reasons I like this one more than the first. It goes for a more laid-back tone for a lot of the movie. Not saying there isn't a lot of action, because there's a lot of that too, but the main story with Peter Quill meeting his father isn't really that action-packed. There's a lot of just sitting around and talking, sometimes with no dialogue at all, and I absolutely adore that. Everyone gets fleshed out a little bit more in this movie. Rocket even gets his own little arc with how he needs to be less of an asshole around the people he loves. And after seeing the third movie, man, that just hits even harder now. Groot gets a lot more screen time, now being Baby Groot. Gamora and Nebula's relationship is expanded upon, and we also get more of Yondu. Until, you know, he dies. Then of course we've got the main plot of this movie, being with Peter and his newly found godly dad, Ego. The character of Ego was always really interesting to me. He reveals himself as Peter Quill's long-lost father, a revelation that initially brings joy and a sense of belonging to him. However, as the story unfolds, we come to understand that Ego's intentions aren't really what they seem, and when we find out what his plan actually is and what he did to Peter's mother, it's actually quite heartbreaking. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is what I'd call the perfect sequel. It's got more humor, more characters, more drama, more emotional moments, and somehow it manages to balance all of those elements into one consistent narrative. And somehow, it isn't even the best Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but I'll get to that in a minute.
I like that, Spider-Man! You showed me a new way of life!
Spider-Man No Way Home. Man, the hype for this one was crazy. The lead up to this movie was filled with so many rumors, memes, fake leaks, some real leaks too, and a whole lot of discussion. Most of these discussions were centered around who would and who wouldn't be in the movie. There were a ton of rumors that this movie was going to bring back the Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, and people were kind of unsure. There was some stuff pointing against it and some stuff pointing towards it, and people were just really hyped. Then when the movie finally came out and it turned out the rumors were true, man, that just felt so satisfying to watch. This movie is the finale of what fans called the Spider-Man Home Trilogy. This being because every movie in the trilogy has the word home in it for some reason. And yeah, I'll have to agree with what other people say about this movie. It's by far the best in the trilogy. Not saying the other ones weren't also great, it's just that this one really went one step beyond. If I were to have one problem with Homecoming and Far From Home, it'd be that they're overall pretty lighthearted. Not saying that's a bad thing, it just makes them feel like they have lower stakes than the other Spider-Man movies. And Spider-Man is a character who I feel should go through some tough moments. In this movie though, they give us all of that plus more. Yeah, Peter Parker really goes through some stuff here. The whole plot centers around Peter right after the events of Far From Home, with Mysterio revealing Spider-Man's identity. That leads to Peter getting wrapped up in quite a bit of controversy, with quite a lot of people believing he killed Mysterio. A thing I really like with this is how there's not just one side to it. There are people with differing views. Some are on the side of Spider-Man and some are on the side of Mysterio. It really makes the world feel more realistic and like something like this could actually happen. Of course, this presents a lot of problems for Peter, with him not being accepted into MIT because of it. So he does what any sane person would do. Go to Doctor Strange and try to brainwash the world. Yeah, this aspect of the movie is definitely the most criticized. I get that it's kinda dumb and a little out of character for Doctor Strange, but I don't know, it didn't really bother me that much. It's mostly just used as a plot point, so I didn't really mind it, since the events that it leads to are all worth it. So, we all know what happens next. Doctor Strange tries to make everyone forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but his spell fails, which for some reason brings a bunch of villains from other universes into theirs, including Doc Ock, Green Goblin, and Sandman from the Sam Raimi movies, and the Lizard and Electro from the Mark Webb movies. Why only these guys from these universes specifically? I don't know, but I also really don't care, because they handled these guys so perfectly. They all really do feel like they're taken right out of the original movies, and they also actually expand on their characters and give them a bit of closure. For example, Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a pretty weak villain. For being so iconic in the comics and being played by such an amazing actor like Jamie Foxx, his portrayal in that movie was pretty disappointing. Here, however, man, they make him look so much cooler. I mean, look at this design. It's so much better than whatever his design in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was. Doc Ock is also expanded on a lot. He's the first one of the villains to get cured, and after that point, he acts like a good guy and actually helps out in the final battle, which was a really nice redemption story for him. The only villains I'd say were kind of underused in this movie definitely has to be Sandman and the Lizard. I don't know, they just kind of felt like they were phoning it in a bit. I mean, the actor for Sandman isn't even in the movie. He's just there as a voice, with him just being the sand creature for most of the movie. So while those two were pretty disappointing, I cannot say the same for Green Goblin. Green Goblin is a damn menace in this movie. I don't know how, but they actually managed to take this goofy-ass villain and make him into a real intimidating threat. The things he does in this movie are just crazy, and the performance by Willem Dafoe is just outstanding. His sadistic smile and laugh just brings so much life to this character, and if this is the last time we see him in this role, man, he's really going out with a bang. Then, of course, we've got what everyone came for, Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. And man, it was so worth it to finally see these two playing Spider-Man again. Now this is how fan service is done right. Not only are they really cool to see back as Spider-Man, I mean, it had been years since the last time we saw them in this role, but they also play a big part in the story, even with the fact that they're not really in it until the last third. They're here for the exact perfect amount of time that they need to, and man, is it just so satisfying to see all these three Spider-Man finally come together. It really felt like a dream come true. And the movie is great outside of the fan service too. There's plenty of funny moments, cool action scenes, and even quite a lot of tragedy. Yeah, this movie does get pretty emotional sometimes, and it really does feel like the ultimate live-action Spider-Man movie. Man, I love almost everything about this movie, and I absolutely can't wait until the next one. However, for as much as I love No Way Home, there is one movie that I think was just a little bit better. Now, I had a real tough time choosing what my favorite MCU movie was. I mean, I love so many of these that it was a really hard choice. But in the end, yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 takes the cake. Man, what an outstanding movie this is. I was actually a little worried going into this. Yes, I know it's a James Gunn movie, and all his previous movies have been absolute bangers, but I don't know, I used to feel the same about Taika Waititi, but then we got Love and Thunder. This one, however, did not disappoint. Man, what a journey this movie is. It acts as the finale to the James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, and man, what a way to end it. This movie was an absolute treat to watch. I'm someone who absolutely adores the first two Guardians movies, and somehow, for me, they've only been getting better and better with each movie. Throughout this movie, there's just a sense of sadness and dread in all the characters. The plot focuses around the Guardians trying to save Rocket after he's attacked and almost dies in the beginning of the movie. Yeah, this movie focuses a lot on Rocket, fleshing out his backstory and also explaining a lot of the things about him from previous movies. Like, for example, how in Guardians 2, he doesn't really know how to talk to his friends without seeming like an asshole. That being because he lost all his friends when he was little and he went through a lot of trauma. You really feel bad for him in this movie. Before this, Rocket was always just kind of the comic relief character who would just crack jokes every now and then. Here though, you really find out the extent of what he went through, and it is just heartbreaking to see. It was created by this man, the High Evolutionary, who's just the most messed up villain you can think of. He pretty much sees himself as a god, wanting to control life and creating different creatures to try and create his perfect society, with no regard to the creatures' well-beings. You know, for as much as I love sympathetic villains like Thanos and Killmonger, sometimes it's also nice to just watch someone who's just pure evil, and that's exactly what the High Evolutionary is. The other characters also get a lot of time to shine. Drax and Mantis are absolutely hilarious like always, and Peter and Gamora's relationship is pretty interesting, considering it's a Gamora from a different timeline. And Nebula also gets a lot of time to shine, which was a pretty welcome surprise. She's really grown to be one of my favorites. Man, what an amazing movie this was. Not only is it really funny, really heartfelt, action-packed, and tragic, but it is an absolutely amazing movie that not only is the best Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but the best MCU movie ever made, and I'll continue to enjoy rewatching it for years to come. But if we're counting non-MCU movies, Across the Spider-Verse is better than anything on this list, fight me. Well, Joe, was I able to convince you? Joe? Joe!
What? Huh?
Did you sleep through all of that?
Oh, yeah, I guess I did. I just got so bored listening to you talk about that nerdy stuff that I got all eepy.
Well, then we're doing it again! And this time, you're gonna watch all the movies with me!
Can't we just watch an actual good movie instead? How about Citizen Kane? Now that's a good movie.
No, we're watching Marvel! And that's final!
No, Citizen Kane!
Marvel!
Citizen Kane!
Marvel!
Citizen Kane!
Marvel!
Varför skriker ni?
You wanna just let Wally pick a movie instead?
Sure. Wally, what movie do you wanna watch?
You wanna just go outside instead?
Yeah, sure, let's do that.